At exactly 4 hours 12 minutes in the morning, the calm waters of the South China Sea erupted in fire. From the horizon, a swarm of missiles tore through the night sky, their trails cutting jagged lines over the USS Gerald R. Ford's flight deck. The carrier's alarms blared, sailors sprinted to stations, and the sea itself seemed to shake as interceptors leapt into action. For hours, Beijing had claimed the initiative, but in the space of seconds, the tide shifted. From the depths of the Pacific, hidden American assets came alive, transmitting encrypted launch orders that would change the course of the battle. A strike unlike anything seen in decades was already in motion. And the target was not just a fleet, but the very core of China's nuclear deterrent. What had triggered this sudden and overwhelming counterstrike? And what would it mean for the balance of power across the Indo-Pacific? If you demand clear-eyed, unflinching military insight, stand with us, like, subscribe, and add your voice below. Your insight fuels this mission. 4:12 in the morning. The first strike. The first wave came in low and fast carrier-killer missiles, skimming barely 50 feet above the waves. China's strike package had been in the air for less than 6 minutes, launched from both H-6 Newton bombers over the mainland coast and Type 055 destroyers prowling the contested waters. Each warhead carried precision guidance systems designed to home in on the USS Gerald R. Ford, the centerpiece of the U.S. Navy's newest carrier strike group. The Ford's Combat Information Center was already at General Quarters. Within 30 seconds of the inbound alert, the Aegis combat system aboard the escorting USS Thomas Hudner, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, began tracking over 24 threats. SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors roared from vertical launch cells, curving into the sky to meet the oncoming barrage. Phalanx CIWS turrets spun to life, spitting streams of depleted uranium rounds into the air. The first impacts were intercepted at 30 nautical miles out, brief blossoms of fire marking kill after kill. But 4 missiles broke through the outer defensive screen, forcing last-second evasive maneuvers by the Ford's helm. A single missile detonated harmlessly in the sea, its seeker jammed by airborne EA 18-gram growlers overhead. 4:18 in the morning. U.S. response orders. In the flag plot, Rear Admiral Douglas Vance gave the order that would turn defense into counterstrike. From a submerged position over 500 nautical miles east, the fast-attack submarine USS South Dakota received the go code to fire. 24 Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles surged from her tubes, each programmed with complex waypoints to evade Chinese radar coverage and strike deep into strategic infrastructure. Simultaneously, B-1B Lancer bombers forward deployed in Guam were airborne, carrying long-range anti-ship missiles for follow-up strikes. 4:24 in the morning. Layered defense holds. The Aegis combat system proved its worth. With the second wave of Chinese missiles now visible on radar, the system's cooperative engagement capability allowed multiple ships to share targeting data in real time. This meant that a missile spotted by a Ticonderoga-class cruiser on the far flank could be destroyed by a destroyer on the opposite side of the formation without hesitation. The tactical doctrine was clear: keep the carrier alive at all costs. Without the Ford's air wing, the U.S. presence in the South China Sea would be crippled. 4:37 in the morning. Counterattack phase begins. As the last of the incoming missiles was neutralized, the Tomahawks were already skimming over the Philippine Sea. Their terrain-hugging profiles kept them invisible to ground-based radars until the last minutes before impact. The targets were no longer just surface combatants. The strike package was aimed at critical nuclear missile storage facilities, radar sites, and command centers along China's southeastern coast. Intelligence had confirmed days earlier that these sites were key to Beijing's strategic deterrent posture. Taking them offline would not only remove immediate threats, but also send a message. Escalation would come at a cost China could not afford. 4:50 in the morning. Chinese naval maneuvers. Chinese commanders, realizing the severity of the incoming U.S. retaliation, ordered their fleet to disperse. Type 055 destroyers and smaller corvettes began to retreat toward heavily defended littoral zones. Overhead, J-20 stealth fighters moved into patrol positions, anticipating that U.S. carrier-based F-35Cs would soon enter the fight. But the real concern was on land. Underground bunkers hosting DF-41 intercontinental ballistic missiles were now under direct threat. Even if hardened against attack, their above-ground support structures, communication arrays, and fueling systems were vulnerable. 5:03 in the morning. Special operations in motion. Unknown to most of the fleet, a U.S. Navy SEAL team had been inserted via mini-submersible the previous evening, staging on a remote islet just 20 miles from a key Chinese radar installation. Their mission was to laser designate the target for incoming Tomahawks, ensuring pinpoint accuracy. This was not an act of conquest, it was precision disruption, aimed at crippling command and control, without triggering wider civilian damage. 5:15 in the morning. Air Wing launch. The Ford's deck crew, now operating at full tempo, launched a mixed package of F-35C Lightning IIs and F/A-18E Super Hornets. Their mission: clear the skies of hostile fighters, suppress any remaining anti-ship missile batteries, and protect the strike corridor for inbound Tomahawks. The F-35C's stealth and sensor fusion meant they could detect enemy J-22 before being seen themselves, giving the U.S. a decisive edge in the aerial domain. 5:32 in the morning. Impact. One by one, Tomahawk warheads detonated across multiple strategic sites. Satellite imagery later confirmed radar domes flattened, missile transport vehicles destroyed, and key communication hubs rendered silent. The strikes were surgical military infrastructure shattered, but the surrounding civilian zones untouched. The attack's precision was a statement in itself. America could hit hard, deep, and without collateral chaos. Political ramifications begin. In Beijing, emergency meetings of the Central Military Commission were called before dawn. In Washington, the National Security Council convened in the Situation Room. Across Allied capitals Tokyo, Canberra, London's secure lines buzzed with urgent coordination. The question was no longer about the battle for the South China Sea. It was about whether this exchange marked the limit of escalation or only the beginning. 5:40 in the morning. China's counterstrike authorization. In the fortified command center beneath Beijing's western hills, the atmosphere was tense but focused. The Central Military Commission had just received confirmation of multiple strikes on their southeastern nuclear support facilities. Within minutes, orders were issued for a coordinated counterattack designed to force the U.S. Navy carrier group out of missile range. This was not a blind retaliation, it was a calculated move to regain the initiative. Coastal rocket brigades began loading DF-26 carrier-killer ballistic missiles, while long-range YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missiles were prepared aboard both shore batteries and planned destroyers still operating near the Paracel Islands. 5:47 in the morning. U.S. fleet dispersal. Rear Admiral Douglas Vance knew the next salvo would be faster, deadlier, and more difficult to intercept. He ordered the Ford's strike group into a dispersed defense formation, widening the spacing between escort ships to reduce the effectiveness of massed missile strikes. The USS Thomas Hudner and USS Antietam, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, moved north to extend radar coverage. The USS South Dakota, having already released her Tomahawk payload, slipped deeper into the Philippine Sea to a new firing position. Meanwhile, aerial refueling tankers were dispatched from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam to extend the Ford's Air Wing's patrol reach. 5:55 in the morning. Hypersonic threat detected. The Aegis combat system detected the launch of at least 6 YJ-21 missiles. Traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 10, these hypersonic threats were beyond the capability of most older naval defense systems. But the Ford's escorts carried SM-6 interceptors, one of the few systems with a fighting chance against such targets. Within seconds, targeting data was shared across the group's cooperative engagement capability network. The first intercepts were launched at extreme range, using predictive algorithms to anticipate the hypersonic missile's unpredictable flight paths. 6:02 in the morning. High-altitude dogfights begin. Above the South China Sea, the first F-35C Lightning IIs made contact with enemy J-20 stealth fighters. Despite their low observable designs, the J-22's less advanced sensor fusion meant they were often reacting to threats rather than controlling the engagement. The F-35Cs operated in hunter-killer pairs, with one jet acting as a passive sensor node while the other maneuvered for missile shots. Within 5 minutes, 2 J-22 had been forced to break off, chased by AMRAAMs fired from beyond visual range. The U.S. Air Wing had secured a fragile but vital bubble of air superiority over the carrier's immediate area. 6:10 in the morning. Electronic warfare surge. The U.S. Navy's EA-18 Growlers moved in closer to the Chinese coastline, unleashing powerful jamming sweeps aimed at blinding coastal missile tracking radars. This electronic curtain disrupted targeting data for China's DF-26 batteries, forcing missile crews to rely on less precise over-the-horizon targeting relays, a weakness the U.S. was quick to exploit. At the same time, the USS Antietam deployed Nulka active missile decoys, designed to lure incoming missiles away from their real targets. 6:18 in the morning. Hypersonic near miss. One YJ-21 managed to evade interception until the last moment. The missile's plasma trail glowed like a meteor as it screamed toward the USS Thomas Hudner. In a flash, the destroyer's close-in weapon systems activated, saturating the air with tungsten rounds. The warhead detonated 200 yards short, close enough to rock the ship, but far enough to avoid casualties or serious damage. The psychological impact was immediate. Hypersonic missiles were no longer a theoretical threat. They were here, and they were hunting. 6:25 in the morning, second U.S. offensive wave. Knowing the Chinese fleet was withdrawing toward heavily defended waters, Admiral Vance authorized a second precision strike. From over 700 miles away, another submarine, USS Illinois, launched a fresh salvo of Tomahawks, this time aimed at planned naval bases in Hainan. These strikes targeted fuel depots, dry docks, and sensor installations, effectively cutting China's southern fleet from its logistical lifelines. Meanwhile, a pair of B-2 Spirit Street Elth bombers, launched from Whiteman Air Force Base hours earlier, were now in position over the western Pacific. Their loadouts of GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators were intended for one purpose: neutralizing hardened command bunkers if escalation demanded it. 6:42 in the morning. Beijing's dilemma. Chinese leadership now faced a critical decision. They could double down, escalating into a full-scale regional war with unpredictable consequences, or they could halt and open back-channel communications. Yet with state media already framing the U.S. strikes as unprovoked aggression, political pressure pushed toward continued action. 6:55 in the morning. International ripples. In Tokyo, Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force raised readiness levels, dispatching additional destroyers equipped with Aegis Ashore systems to intercept any stray missile trajectories. In Canberra, the Australian government activated its defense coordination protocols, offering basing rights for U.S. aircraft. NATO's Atlantic Command began discreetly positioning assets for potential reinforcement in the Pacific theater. 7 o'clock in the morning. The standoff intensifies. By sunrise, the South China Sea was a chessboard of steel and firepower. Both sides had absorbed and delivered blows, but neither had landed a knockout strike. The USS Gerald R. Ford remained operational, its air wing intact, its escorts vigilant. China's naval forces were battered, but far from beaten. The question hanging over every admiral and general's head was simple. Who would take the next step, and would it tip the world into a wider conflict? 7:12 in the morning. Locking the shield. By mid-morning, Rear Admiral Douglas Vance's carrier group had shifted into a hardened defense grid, the USS Gerald R. Ford remained at the center, flanked by 3 concentric layers of protection: Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the inner ring, Ticonderoga-class cruisers in the middle, and support ships trailing behind under the guard of littoral combat ships equipped with advanced anti-submarine packages. The Aegis combat system was running at maximum integration, seamlessly fusing targeting data from ship radars, airborne E-2D Hawkeyes, and space-based infrared sensors. Every moving object within 500 miles was tracked, classified, and assigned a priority threat value. It was a wall of awareness, a shield that could shift, adapt, and strike back. 7:20 in the morning. Submarine shadow hunt. U.S. Navy sonar operators aboard the USS South Dakota detected faint acoustic signatures of 2 Chinese Shang-class nuclear-powered attack submarines attempting to close on the carrier group from the south. The contact reports were instantly shared with the USS Illinois and a Japanese Soryu-class submarine patrolling the western approaches. Within minutes, the U.S.-Japan undersea network coordinated a pincer maneuver. Sonobuoys were deployed by MH-60R Seahawk helicopters, creating a layered acoustic trap. The Shang-class subs, realizing their approach was compromised, were forced to retreat toward shallower, more defensible waters, sacrificing the element of surprise. 7:33 in the morning. Air supremacy expands. The Ford's F-35 Sea Patrols push their perimeter another 100 miles outward, sweeping the skies in coordinated missions. Using sensor fusion, they identified multiple Y-9 patrol aircraft attempting to vector in long-range missile strikes. Two of these aircraft were driven away by radar locks before they could transmit targeting data. Meanwhile, US E-2D Hawkeyes maintained a constant high-altitude orbit, providing the Aegis network with persistent early warning. This synergy between stealth fighters and airborne radar was choking off China's ability to locate and target the carrier strike group. 7:40 in the morning. The message from Guam. At Andersen Air Force Base, a flight of B-1B Lancers took off loaded with AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles. Their mission was not an immediate strike but a positioning maneuver, a visible signal to Beijing that the U.S. could bring more firepower into the theater at will. This move also reassured allies, broadcasting American commitment to hold the line in the Indo-Pacific. 7:55 in the morning. Planned desperation tactics. Facing mounting losses and operational setbacks, China's Southern Theater Command attempted an unconventional play, deploying a swarm of Type 022 Hubei-class fast missile boats from concealed island coves. Operating at high speed, these vessels hoped to exploit radar clutter and punch through to the carrier's perimeter. But the U.S. had prepared for this. Littoral combat ships USS Montgomery and USS Charleston moved into intercept positions, launching their own Hellfire-equipped rotary drones to track the incoming swarm. Precision naval gunfire, guided by drone feeds, began neutralizing the small craft before they closed within missile range. 8:05 in the morning. Cyber shadows. Deep within U.S. Cyber Command's Pacific Node, a covert cyber operation began targeting the plan's tactical data networks. While the effects were subtle, Chinese vessels began reporting intermittent glitches in fire control systems and data link communications. The degradation was just enough to slow missile launch cycles and create command delays, buying precious time for the carrier strike group. 8:15 in the morning, second layer strikes. With the immediate missile threat reduced, Admiral Vance greenlit targeted strikes against coastal anti-ship missile batteries. From 150 miles out, F/A-18E Super Hornets, armed with AGM-88 HARM missiles, dove into low-level attack profiles. The HARMs homed in on active radar emitters, crippling the guidance systems of multiple YJ-12 and YJ-18 shore-based launchers. Each destroyed battery meant fewer threats in the next wave, and each loss tightened the U.S. grip on the battlespace. 8:28 in the morning, international coordination grows. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force destroyers joined the eastern flank, their Aegis systems syncing seamlessly with the U.S. network. Australia dispatched a Hobart-class destroyer from Darwin, set to arrive within 2 days. British and Canadian liaison officers aboard the Ford began integrating NATO standard procedures into the battle rhythm. Though no NATO warships were yet in theater, their presence in planning reinforced the broader message. This was not just an American operation, it was an alliance in action. 8:40 in the morning, shaping the battlespace. By now, the U.S. carrier group had transitioned from reactive defense to active area control. Long-range UAVs, launched from the Ford's deck, began mapping Chinese naval movements in the Gulf of Tonkin and beyond. Every vessel detected was classified, its movement patterns logged, and targeting packages updated for potential future strikes. The Ford's intelligence team called it locking the board, the point at which the enemy's freedom of maneuver shrinks so drastically that every move becomes predictable. 8:55 in the morning, Beijing faces the wall. As the morning wore on, Chinese leadership began to recognize the gravity of their situation. The USS Gerald R. Ford was not only intact, but now held the advantage. The protective shield of Aegis, the extended reach of the air wing, and the silent threat of submerged U.S. submarines created a web from which the plan could not easily escape. Yet, this was far from over. In war, desperation often breeds innovation, and in the war rooms of Beijing, a new plan was already taking shape, one that would force the Americans into a position they could not control. 9:10 in the morning, silence before the shift. For nearly 15 minutes, the South China Sea seemed to hold its breath. Radar scopes aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford showed no new missile launches, no incoming air formations, no telltale sonar contacts pushing toward the carrier's perimeter. For Admiral Douglas Vance, the lull felt wrong. In his experience, quiet in the middle of a fight was not relief. It was a signal that something bigger was on the horizon. 9:15 in the morning. The hidden arsenal awakens. Hundreds of miles to the north, In a stretch of coastline rarely mentioned in open-source military assessments, concealed missile silos began to stir. These were not the well-known DF-21 or DF-26 systems that American intelligence had tracked for years. This was a new platform, a mobile hypersonic glide vehicle system that had never been displayed in parades or leaked in satellite imagery. Its codename, Vanguard, had been intercepted only days earlier in fragmented signals intelligence, but no firm assessment had been made of its operational status. Now, thermal signatures and movement detected by U.S. reconnaissance satellites confirmed the system was real and preparing to fire. 9:20 in the morning. Vanguard launches. In near-simultaneous bursts, multiple glide vehicles roared into the upper atmosphere, propelled by solid fuel boosters. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles, these weapons could shift trajectory mid-flight, skimming the edge of space before diving toward targets at hypersonic speeds. Their intended destinations? Unknown, but their flight profiles suggested a range that could threaten not only the Ford strike group, but also Allied bases in Guam and even northern Australia. 9:23 in the morning. U.S. crisis response. Admiral Vance ordered an immediate break in formation, dispersing the carrier group into a wider defensive arc. The Ford's air wing scrambled additional F-35Cs to extend radar coverage, while E-2D Hawkeyes vectored into higher altitude orbits to catch the elusive signatures of the incoming vehicles. Meanwhile, in Colorado Springs, U.S. Northern Command and Strategic Command initiated Skywall, a rarely used contingency plan designed to integrate Navy Aegis interceptors, land-based THAAD batteries, and Air Force missile defense radars into a single coordinated fire control web. 9:28 in the morning. Unlikely ally steps in. Then came the unexpected. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force announced that its newest Aegis ashore installation in Kyushu had already locked onto two of the incoming glide vehicles. Without hesitation, they launched SM-3 Block IIA interceptors, a cooperative technology developed jointly with the United States. The move was bold, politically sensitive, and signaled that Tokyo was no longer content to stand on the defensive sidelines. Two blinding flashes in the upper atmosphere marked direct intercepts, but several more Vanguard vehicles continued their approach. 9:33 in the morning. The diversion becomes clear. As analysts at the Ford's Combat Information Center studied the incoming trajectories, a chilling realization emerged. The hypersonic launch was not purely about destruction, it was about forcing the U.S. fleet's attention upward and outward. At the same moment the Vanguard missiles were launched, a massive cyber intrusion was detected targeting satellite communication links and radar feeds in the theater. If successful, the attack could have blinded the U.S. carrier group's long-range detection capability for precious minutes enough for China to reposition critical naval assets into more favorable engagement zones. 9:37 in the morning, holding the line. But U.S. Cyber Command, already on heightened alert, slammed digital doors shut as quickly as they opened. Redundant communication pathways flicked online, and battle networks resynced within seconds. Still, the attempt revealed something critical. Beijing was willing to gamble its newest, most secret weapon, not for a killing blow, but for strategic space on the chessboard. 9:42 in the morning. A new phase looms. By the time the last Vanguard vehicle burned up in the atmosphere short of its target, the strategic map had shifted. Chinese naval elements, once retreating, were now massing near fortified island bastions, shielded by overlapping air defense systems. The U.S. had survived the surprise, but the next round would be fought deeper in contested waters, where the enemy's shore-based firepower could be brought to bear at maximum strength. For Admiral Vance, the message was clear. The fight was far from over, and the next decisions would define whether the South China Sea remained a contested zone or became a proving ground for a new era of warfare. The Vanguard strike attempt marked a significant pivot in the battle's trajectory. While it failed to achieve a decisive blow, it revealed three critical truths to military planners and policymakers. First, the People's Liberation Army was willing to risk exposing a top-tier, previously undisclosed hypersonic system in active combat. This was an escalation not taken lightly in military doctrine. Such a reveal forfeited an element of surprise for any future conflict, meaning Beijing must have calculated that the immediate strategic gain outweighed the long-term cost. The gamble, however, did not pay off. U.S. and Allied missile defense networks, including Japan's newly operational Aegis ashore site, demonstrated an unprecedented level of integration and readiness. This reinforced a long-standing U.S. doctrine. The strength of alliances multiplies deterrence. Second, the attempted cyberstrike running in parallel to the Vanguard launches underscored the multi-domain nature of modern warfare. The fact that U.S. Cyber Command, in coordination with Pacific Fleet assets, could repel the intrusion within seconds showcased resilience in the face of sophisticated electronic attack. The message was subtle but unmistakable. America's command and control backbone could not be severed easily. This was a reassurance not only to the crews aboard the Gerald R. Ford, but to every allied nation watching the engagement unfold in real time. Third, the maneuver created breathing space for Chinese naval forces to reposition into more defensible zones. While tactically sound from Beijing's perspective, the move also placed them into a predictable pattern of layered coastal defense, precisely the kind of environment U.S. carrier strike groups trained to dismantle. The operational chessboard now favored a U.S. force that thrives on patient pressure, long-range precision strikes, and denial of enemy mobility. Politically, the events reverberated across the globe. NATO defense ministers convened an urgent secure conference, reaffirming commitment to Indo-Pacific stability. Japan's early missile intercepts, taken without lengthy consultation, signaled a bolder security posture that Washington quietly applauded. Australia's forward basing offer was accepted, with rotational U.S. bomber deployments scheduled within weeks. For Beijing, the day ended without a decisive victory, and with the knowledge that its most secretive missile program was now a known quantity to U.S. intelligence. For Washington, it was proof that layered defense, joint operations, and allied coordination could blunt even the most advanced strike concepts in the modern arsenal. The broader strategic consequence was clear. The United States and its allies had not only weathered the storm, but emerged with the initiative and the credibility to deter the next one. The battle in the South China Sea had not ended in a single thunderclap of victory or defeat. Instead, it closed for now in a tense stalemate, the kind that history remembers as a warning. The USS Gerald R. Ford still sailed, her decks busy with the rhythm of readiness. China's most ambitious strike in decades had been met, contained, and answered with precision. But the real story was not just about missiles intercepted or hypersonic weapons unveiled. It was about the orchestration of a modern alliance. At every stage, the United States acted not in isolation, but as the keystone in a network of nations committed to stability. From Japan's rapid Aegis ashore intercepts to Australia's forward basing offer, the message was unmistakable. America's strength multiplies when shared with partners who trust its leadership. The financial cost was staggering: hundreds of millions of dollars in munitions expended in mere hours, fuel burned in relentless aerial patrols, and the unblinking watch of crews operating at the limits of endurance. Yet in the calculus of deterrence, such expenditures are the price of avoiding something far costlier: a war without boundaries. For Beijing, the gamble of revealing its Vanguard system without securing a decisive gain was a reminder of the risks inherent in escalation. The world now knew the system's signature, its vulnerabilities, and its countermeasures. The psychological edge of the unknown had been lost. For Washington and its allies, the takeaway was equally sobering. The speed of modern warfare leaves no time for slow decision-making. In this fight, seconds separated survival from disaster. And it was preparation, not luck, that made those seconds count. In the halls of the Pentagon, the lesson will be dissected for years: how layered defenses, multi-domain integration, and allied interoperability turned the tide. But beyond the strategy rooms, the larger truth remains the same. Strength deters chaos, and peace demands power. The next challenge may not come in the South China Sea. It could rise from the Arctic, the Baltic, or far beyond. But the playbook forged here: rapid coordination, precise response, and unwavering alliances will stand ready. To those watching, remember, history is not written only by the events we endure, but by how prepared we are when they arrive. Stay informed, stay aware. In a world where the balance can shift in minutes, understanding is our first line of defense. Subscribe, follow, and engage, because the next turning point may already be in motion, and we cannot afford to look away.